Well, we just want to welcome everybody to the presentation. How is that looking on your screens? Is that looking good? Does it look like the presentation? Good, because I'm actually going to do something to it. I don't know why I've got something in front of it, but it didn't show for you, but that's...
Can I just say in the meantime, Rachel, while you do that, so everyone, if you've got questions during the session or while we're doing the presentation, please use the chat and we'll get back to it. But we will have an open forum for discussion after the presentation as well. So either write them in the chat or write them on a piece of paper so you remember your good questions for us.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to our talk. Mia, Adam and I have put together a Centre for Solution-Focused Research that exists to explore what it's like to receive solution-focused therapy. And we do this using quite a broad range of techniques. Some of you will know that we're also interested in what happens in the brain during solution-focused therapy, and that's when we use EEG kits to explore how the brain responds to that. And that is something we'll be presenting later in the year. But today, what we're going to be talking about is some follow-up work that we've done to explore with the participants themselves what it's actually like to undergo solution-focused therapy. And I hope that we are able to present sufficient information to guide you and inform you in your practice, and perhaps to start thinking about what it is that we do and why we get the results that we get. So to start off with, who are we presenting today? We have 11 participants who've completed the full research package. And so that includes EEG as well as the conversational work that we're going to be talking about today. 4 of them are from the US and 7 from the UK. We have 7 female and 4 male participants. We have Hispanic, African-American and white participants in the mix. And 2 of the participants would be described as being neurodiverse. One of them has ADHD, and one of them is on the autism spectrum. So of our 11 participants, we've got quite the range of people included. Now, what we did is we carried out a typical solution-focused conversation with each of these participants. We gathered consent from them to take part in a solution-focused conversation, but they hadn't heard the questions before, and so they didn't really know what we were going to ask. So we did include in the information sheet an idea of the types of questions that we would ask. So they had an idea, but it wasn't really, I suppose, until we started that they got a sense of how this type of therapy works. And each of the therapy sessions was roughly about half an hour long. And once we'd completed the sessions, an independent person then interviewed each of the participants to ask them a few questions as to what it was like to take part in this work. Now, all the way through this, we've tried to remain as independent of each stage of the work as possible. So we had 2 people conducting the therapy sessions. We had 3, I think, or 4 independent people conducting the post-session interviews. These were then transcribed, and then they were looked through by yet another person to see what the common kind of themes were. And then they've all been brought together today by us. The participants will remain anonymous throughout. You won't know who has said what, but you will know what they've said. So with that in mind, let's have a little look. So in terms of answering the question, kind of how was this therapy for you, we get quite a lot of different reactions. And I'm going to hand over to Adam at this point to talk us through what you can see on the screen.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Rachel. I think what you can see here really just captures a snippet. So these are exact words that we pulled from what they said. And then we kind of added this bottom piece to this bottom quote that kind of captures a bunch of what they said. So it's one of the participants said it's the nuances within these little tiny things. You're talking it through with them, which means the therapist, and you're very much there with them and you've experienced yourself. I think that's such a beautiful way of describing what we do. We're in the little things. We're just talking it through with somebody, but we really get to experience ourselves in that moment. And I think that's really, really beautiful. I think one of the other things that I really want to highlight here is those 11 people. It doesn't sound like that many people. And we're in the midst of gathering data, so we'll collect more as we go. But one of the things that we're trying to get to, and I think what we really want to also ask you for your thoughts kind of at the end of this, is in essence what the purpose of qualitative research is. With qualitative research, you're not trying to get to what they call generalizability. In outcome research, what you're trying to do typically in quantitative research is you're trying to take a small sample and you're trying to say this sample of people is a really good representation of the population as a whole. And so then you can say the findings that we have found here, we want to generalize and we want to say this is typically what people should expect or what typically people would achieve in this kind of therapy. But the purpose of qualitative research is really different. The purpose of qualitative research is to really give voice to people, to say, what was your experience? And you can see in most of the data that we're going to present, we're really going to be presenting their words so that you can kind of hear from these 11 people. Now, the point is to get to a place of what qualitative researchers call saturation, which is when you interview enough people, you stop hearing new things. Let's say I interview 50 people, and there's something new, there's something different in each one of those. And then on the 51st person, you still hear a very unique story, but it overlaps with the other 50. And so you kind of say, okay, I think we've captured the experience here. So that's why when you look at these things and you hear like people saying like, it was a really interesting, it was affirming to me, it gave me a refreshing view. It cuts to the chase really quickly. You can hear that there's a lot of variability in what people's general response or reaction was to this process. But I think one of the things that is important to note, and we didn't really put this in a particular place in the slides, is that at the end, we asked people a couple of important questions. We said, was it helpful? And every single one of them said, yes, it was helpful to me. And remember, this is a single session. We only saw them one time. And then the other question that we asked them was, would you recommend this to somebody else, this kind of therapy to somebody else? And across the board, all 11 of them said, yes, I would recommend this to other people. Now, I think that's important because in a minute, well, in a while, we're going to get to one person who had a very different experience. So we'll highlight that difference, but I want you to hold in your mind, even that person who had a very different experience said, yes, it was helpful to me. And yes, I would recommend this to somebody else. The other thing that's important about this is that these people, like Rachel mentioned before, they're quite different from each other. Some of them are American, some of them are European, some of them were African American, some of them were Hispanic or Latino. So they're quite different from each other. Also, that neurodiversity, you'll hear, we'll kind of highlight a couple of times where people who are neurodiverse their experience was a bit different, although still very helpful. So you can see just from these beginning words, people really saying like, it was a good experience. It helped me to grow. It worked really quickly. And again, that is after just 30 to 45 minutes of talking with a therapist, which I think is really, really profound. So just the other thing that we want to kind of orient you to at this point is at the end of this, we're going to ask you again, kind of in that realm of trying to get to a place of saturation. Do you hear things in your work, maybe anecdotally or through direct feedback from people, that it matches this or that is inconsistent with what we've found so far? So at some point during this process, we're going to say, how does this fit with what you know about solution-focused brief therapy and what your clients are saying to you? So if you can kind of keep that in mind as we move through these different processes, that would be helpful. We would appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, we're looking to know as much as we can about this work and what it's like to be receiving this type of therapy, to be really involved in the solution-focused conversation. And I think what's going to become even more interesting as we go through this is to see both how diverse the experiences were, but also the great deal of commonalities in them. And I think if I'll go to the next slide and you'll see a little bit more of what I mean. And so we asked people what changes they've had, you know, have they experienced any change as a result? And this might seem like a strange question because we've literally spoken to them 5 minutes after the session has finished. And, you know, that is perhaps a little difficult to conceptualize. But Mia, I'll hand over to you to explore the comments that people made about the changes they had.
Sure. What we did see was that only a few actually of the participants thought it was a difficult question to begin with, to be talking about change happening already, even after just maybe 5 or 10 minutes coming out of the therapy session. But once they had time to think, they had a lot of words to say about it anyway. And kind of the cognitive changes that we saw or that they expressed was that I have a positive view on my brain. I'm thinking more specifically about what's happening, where and when, and I'm more conscious of it now. It feels really nice. I'm finding me thinking it's not a big problem. It felt right. It does help order this very chaotic mind of mine. It focuses your attention. And I like the dreaming aspect of it. Gave me new perspective. It's given me things to think about, new realizations from this therapy. It all seemed to come out fairly easy, too easily, almost. And also the thing about it was amazing where I did go, surprising the kind of thoughts that it brought out of me. So in that way, the way people were thinking about the session already that short amount of time after coming out of it is we find incredible because there's words here that you would have expected people to have to think about quite a long time before they could express it. But these were things coming out straight from them immediately after, which is finding incredible and really interesting. You want to add something, Adam?
Yeah, one of the things that I was going to say, I was just thinking about a couple of these participants, and there was one woman in particular that I was remembering, and she actually was a psychotherapist, and a psychotherapist who didn't practice solution-focused therapy. And so I thought it was interesting that she would volunteer to be a participant for a solution-focused research study. And one of the things just along this lines of, it was really surprising to me what I said. She came in, I think, with an expectation of, I'm going to talk about this or I'm going to share this. And one of the things that she ended up talking quite a bit about is her children. She had 2 children, and she just kept talking about her children and the role that she wanted to play and the relationships that she wanted to have with her children. And she was one of the people who said at the end, like, I'm really surprised that that's where I went. It took me by surprise what I actually thought. And then she actually even added, I was surprised because it made me realize where my priorities should be. And so it wasn't just surprised about the content that she was sharing, but it was a surprise about the mind shift that she had. And she was saying, it really changed my perspective. I need to reorient where my priorities are. And so I think she was really emblematic of this like shift. A lot of people said it made me think in a way that I haven't thought before, or it made me consider somebody else's perspective in a way. It made me reevaluate my life. And so there was a lot of this like cognitive restructuring that happened for people. But I would say it wasn't even always the same cognitive process. Like sometimes it was just like I thought in a different way. And other times people were saying I was considering it from a totally different perspective that wasn't my own. The therapist made me think about what somebody else might think or say or notice. And that was new information to me. And so even though this kind of captures there was cognitive change, one of the things that I would highlight is it wasn't always the same type of cognitive change, which I think is really quite beautiful.
There was quite a few. Sorry. Come on, Rachel. Oh, it wasn't you, Rachel. Sorry. There was quite a few of them as well saying that they were surprised by what they ended up talking about. They had an expectation of going in to talk about this, but came out with something completely different, which was a surprise to them, but useful. Yeah.
Yes, and I think, there was one in particular who was talking about a situation that had been causing them anxiety, and whether it was anxiety relating to the situation or what was going around in their head. And this idea that it was amazing where it did go, surprising the kind of thoughts it brought out, pulling information out of me, which had I given it any thought, is not something I'd share with anybody. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That they
This
didn't
is just
even
as a standard solution-focused brief therapy session.
Yeah.
It's, we have not known when the clients came in what, had no idea what they were coming with at all. So, yeah. You want to go on to the next slide?
So I was going to say, I think it's also worth thinking that these participants were being videoed during the session. We were recording the conversations.
Hang on it.
They had an EEG kit on their
put some money.
So these people, although they were experiencing what we would think of as a normal solution-focused conversation, actually, they were in a very strange situation altogether.
Rachel, I don't know, could you just briefly explain what the kit is, just so everyone...
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, the kit that we're talking about is a little EEG kit. So it measures the electrical activity of the brain, and it is kind of like a fairly comfortable headset that you put on. So these people were not only just having a conversation with a therapist, they had a hat on, if you like, measuring the electrical activity of their brains. They had a video camera on, they had audio microphones, kind of collecting the information. They were in an unusual setting. Although the research was carried out in a room that was designed to look as normal as possible, if you like, it still was a research lab. So for people to say things like, it's not something I'd share with anybody, to be able to say that after a conversation with a therapist, I think is really extraordinary. Really extraordinary.
Can you put the slides up again, Rachel?
I will.
Thank you. Remember to use the chat if you have questions. Cool.
So we also looked at people's responses to, what changes did you experience? What did you notice in terms of emotional change, emotional impact of the work? And we had some really interesting comments here. The first one, I forgot to feel anxious. We didn't go into what I thought we might be going into, so I stopped feeling anxious. The emotional change, as well as thinking about things differently. People talked about how surprised they were at the focus of the conversation, that even when they were sharing something very private, very intimate within this research setting, how the conversation helped them think about things differently. They talked about it being almost a relief, like a stress relief, to be able to finally say some of these things, to be able to talk about the situation that they find themselves in, their best hopes for the session. Relief, again, it's out now. That I'm no longer holding this thing. I'm no longer keeping it to myself. That idea that, within this solution-focused conversation, that the questions we use, the comments that we make, the way that we encourage clients to explore their existence is bringing about an enormous amount of emotional change. People reported, I feel fulfilled from a 30 to 40-minute therapy session. I'm quite touched, actually. And those comments, I remember being associated with the kind of therapist. The therapist listened to me. The therapist seemed to understand. I feel quite hopeful about things. Somebody described the session as positive, affirming, calming, respectful, uplifting, energizing. Respectful was something that came across a lot. All the participants mentioned feeling respected by the therapist, that they were there, they gave them time, they listened. And that was experienced very positively. A feeling more relaxed. A quote there from one of the participants, the realizations are coming as I'm saying. It's like we say, this is a few minutes after the session has completed. The realizations are coming as I'm saying, that as I'm speaking it through or vocalizing it, verbalizing it, it brings up some nice feelings and thoughts, and it's good.
We had a client as well, which was the client with ASD, who really beautifully said that by talking to the therapist, being in the session and verbalizing the things that the client was verbalizing, and the response from the therapist of not reacting to that, and it becoming it was okay and it was normal to talk about these things, made him feel more normal. And his own words was like, it wasn't left feeling, I wasn't left feeling weird. I was left feeling it's normal, and that makes it okay for me to talk about these things, which is, a profound change in a person's view on oneself, and how that you're not strange, it's okay, and it's normal to have thoughts like this. And he had, the client had never been met in that way before, and this was the first time that person opened up about this. in that setting
Mm.
as well. Bear that in mind, which is quite incredible, you know.
Yeah, I think that was quite an extraordinary experience for that participant because, you know, they'd never had therapy. They'd never experienced this kind of conversation. And they experienced so much through the therapist hearing their thoughts, and in the conversation afterwards, in the interview afterwards, and not being judged on those thoughts, being accepted, you know,
And validating themselves.
yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that is striking, and we'll talk a little bit more about this person specifically a bit later, but there was one person again who kind of had a very different experience of this process, but I think she highlighted in this emotional and affective experience something really profound. So I just want to read a little bit about like exactly what she said. They were the interviewer asked about like, has it changed your mood in any way? And this client said, a moment ago when I was saying what I'm going through and how I felt and what happened with these things, I was tearing up. So this client is telling some very vulnerable things and starts to cry in the middle of the session. And then she adds, I got moved emotionally, but in a positive way. It was not like boo-hoo, boo-hoo, but it's enough for me to evoke really positive feelings. And that's something that doesn't happen all the time. It's nice that this process allowed me to look at myself a little bit more positively. There's more ongoing process now, and I'm happier. It's nice that this process is a comforting process. And I think sometimes when people get overtly emotional in a session, we kind of think, oh, I need to pause, or I need to slow down, or I need to address this emotion in some way. And the therapist didn't. The therapist just kind of carried on with the solution-focused process. And the client said, in some sense, that process in and of itself was a comforting experience. It was a change-inducing experience, which sometimes I think we as therapists don't really catch on to. We get dissuaded by an overt show in emotion, and we make assumptions about what that means. But this person was really saying there was some positive things going on here, and I know that this process is an ongoing process that is going to keep happening, keep changing after I leave here. But it's nice that this process got started. And I think that's something really beautiful that sometimes we don't get to glimpse when we're working with our clients in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea that we've started something there for this person, that the conversation has actually helped them think, I guess they've gained clarity, you know, this is something I would like to explore further, that it would be of benefit for me to explore further, is a hugely valuable outcome to the sessions. So we've mentioned cognitive and emotional changes that the clients have experienced. We also have behavioral, and Adam, you were going to take this one, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things I guess that I would say about this right at the beginning is behavioral. Sometimes what we mean by that is action or behavior. It'll do something, and other times we just clumped it in some sense that this was a process that was happening, that there was change that was happening. We didn't quite know exactly how to capture it all. And so, but if you kind of put this into context with the others, right? We started with some cognitive change. We talked then about some emotional change. Then there's also some behavioral change, and people saying things like, I spoke much more openly than I expected to speak. I did something different than I was expecting. It's just about dealing with things in a different way. And this person was talking about, like, I realized that the way that I had been going about this might not have been the most helpful, but these questions helped me realize I need to deal with things in a different way. Also, then the next one where it says actually learning to take bits that I want to use and use those to my advantage. This was a client who, again, kind of struggled and said, I've never talked about this before. I've never been open about this before. And it isn't all, it wasn't all exactly what I think I want to go and do. But I realized this is really about me taking bits of this and saying, I need to use these to my advantage. And so there was some real decision making that goes on in this process of, I'm going to take this, I'm going to leave this, I'm going to do something with this, I'm not going to take that, which I think is, again, kind of a glimpse into what's going on in people's heads that we don't usually get. We don't know that people are kind of simultaneously, like, answering our questions and thinking about this and making decisions. Oh, I need to do something about that, or I can take this into play. Also, this one I loved. This guy was saying a problem shared is a problem halved, like cut in half. And he said, you're getting rid of some of the burden of carrying this baggage. And this was a guy who was saying, was really struggling with some heavy things, had contemplated ending his life at some point. And so was just kind of like weighing over, this is a huge burden, and I've never really shared this with anyone. And simply coming in and sharing this, talking about this, doing something different, immediately cut the problem in half. It feels like I just unloaded, I took this away. And again, what was fascinating as I was listening to the session is that there was very little emphasis actually on these thoughts that you had had, or this intention that you had had, and it was just like, what would you like to be different, and what impact would that have? And so it was all about difference again. But the client perceived it as, I got to talk about this thing that I've been carrying and has been weighing me down for quite a long time. And so I think just that saying something, sometimes we underestimate the value of that. And then this last one, it depends. This one I love. This one I think is amazing. He said, it depends on where I take it. So we were asking again, do you imagine, has this changed anything for you? And the client said, it depends on where I take it. It depends on if I want to do anything about this. You decide whether you want to go any further. And he was specifically talking about, like, would it be helpful to come back for an additional session? And he actually said, I don't think I need to come back for an additional session. But really, the impact is on, if I decide I want to do something about this, how much do I want to change what we just talked about? And so he even also added in, I don't think it's really about that other person solving my problem. It's about me taking this and deciding how I want to now do something different. And I got enough of that in one session that I don't need to come back. I just need to decide, what do I want to do about this now? Which I think is a really beautiful sentiment about, kind of captures what it is that we do. We have these conversations, and then they decide what they get to do with it after that.
Can I just add to you, Adam, about the one who said about the problem solved, or half solved, a problem shared is half solved. What that client ended up was also identifying that when these thoughts are coming back to me, by having shared this with the therapist in the room, the client identified that when these thoughts will be, if and when they come back to me in the future, I now know I've identified that there's a space where I can go and talk about it. I've got that experience with me now, the positive experience of that. And I can go, okay, Do I think like this about it? No, then I do this. Do I think like this about it? Yes, then I do that. Then I go and talk to someone. And this was a completely new way of thinking for this client. And a perfect safety measurement that was made in that very session by just having one experience of sharing thoughts that client had never shared before, and realized that that was already the problem half solved by sharing.
Yeah.
That's magic.
Yes, I think, again, it shows how powerful some what might seem quite simple questions are in session. That by exploring difference and notice and others notice, and exploring resources and previous experiences, or exploring your best hopes, and all of those things really delivered beautifully to the participants, and that client in particular, like Mia says, it maintained an element of safety in the experience that he was in at that time, that he felt able to know, should he feel the same again, what to do next. And that's a very powerful outcome for these sessions. Okay. Now, identity. This is kind of interesting. We've got big clouds of identity there. And quotes perhaps to explain what we mean. But Adam, again, I think you're taking the lead on this one to start with, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so one of the things that we were thinking about when we kind of put together this slide is that really people were saying some beautiful things about like how they had changed. And again, just after one session, one conversation. And a lot of people, and you can kind of hear connected to the difference in perspective or cognitive thinking, right? This self-realization or a new self-awareness or things like that. But also some people saying like this has made me more confident. You heard in a previous slide, one of the individuals saying like this just makes me feel more normal. I don't feel so different than so many other people before. And then I really like this last one of I feel more connected to who I was and becoming who I am now. And this client in particular, he was talking about most of the solution focused session had kind of focused on the past, the history. The client said, my desired outcome is to be more confident. And the therapist went back in time and said, when have you been the most confident before? And they spent a huge amount of time talking about this time in the past when he had been confident and what was different and all of those kinds of things. And then he said, and then kind of pulled it forward and said, if those things started to show up now, what would you notice? What would be different? And in the post-session interview, the client said, I really felt connected to that confident version of myself. And it makes me realize how much I can do now, how much I can kind of pull back that identity of being confident. And so I think it really highlighted for me kind of that idea. Oftentimes we talk about what version of you, or if that version of you showed up or whatever. And this client in particular really highlighted that of there was a confident version of me, and I now feel more sure that I can get that version back. And then I'll turn it over to Mia and Rachel, because there's also a ton of other really beautiful things that are connected here.
I'm just in the chat, so if you'll grab it, Rachel.
Okay, I will. Yeah. Yes, I mean, we're overwhelmed with material here, as you can probably imagine. You can getting an idea for how eloquent our participants were and how keen they were to share their experience. One of them was kind of interesting, talking about how affirming it had been. They said, I've had therapy before in the past, a different modality of therapy, where I've come away, and the analogy was literally like, you're going to open the airing cupboard and get all your stuff out. And the client then sort of described in quite a bit of detail what it was like, feeling they disclosed a lot of trauma, but the lid hadn't been closed before leaving the therapy room. And they said, so in this session, the solution focus session, you're focusing on the positive aspects rather than getting things out and interrogating the little things. I like the fact that it's listened to, it's acknowledged. By that, they mean the trauma. It's hard and all these things. However, what tools, what kind of things, because then it just empowers you and grows you and celebrates you. Like, well done you, despite all of that. And so this client is really kind of delivering a beautiful image in our minds of how they were able to talk about this thing that had happened. But the session didn't leave the lid off. It didn't leave them thinking they had to walk away without anything being resolved. And I feel that with this quote, the person's alluding to a sense of themselves as being an active agent in the trauma and the management of it, and a confidence in their ability to actually have dealt with it, that they felt they'd grown as a person, that they felt that, because of it, that, they felt celebrated for what they'd been through. And I think that was a very powerful experience for that person. It really, truly was. And another comment I'd like to bring in as well is that of another client who said, I'd say that it is what it is. What do you think to this therapy? It is what it is. Ultimately, it's solution-focused therapy. So there's a solution to that. There's a solution to what it is you want. You just need to work hard to get there. It's given me the tools to be able to see myself in a different way, or see the world in a different way, to move forwards. I would say it's refreshing. I like it because it hits upon the cliches, if you will, to actually have that issue from childhood put in front of you as somebody that knows what they're on about. And it's going through the process to talking through these things. It's really valuable. It is freeing, if you will. The fact that the therapist got an interest and understanding of this work, how it relates to feelings and how the feelings relate to the world and all this sort of stuff, it's really important to me. But the comment in the middle there, it's freeing. That this work, that the way we approached the issues of that person's childhood, that they were still working through now, that for the first time they felt free. And that too is another powerful illustration of how identity was changed by engaging in this kind of conversation.
We need to be aware of time.
Sorry, Mia, did you want to?
We need to be aware of time. We've got 15 minutes left. So
Okay.
if we
Wonderful.
want to open up for discussion.
We've alluded to a participant whose experience was quite different, who was really going through quite tough times. And the way this person spoke about their therapy and their therapeutic experience, they said it's quite an interesting one. It's quite a good idea, I think, to drag yourself into the mindset of an improvement. They then said, it's actually made me quite sad. And how it's made me realize how much work I have to do on myself, that actually this initial conversation, if you like, has actually shown them that there is more to do. But, it's, the person says, I've got work to do, but it shines a light. So that's good. I'm doing all I can, and that's okay. Mm. The therapist confirms that I'm doing the right kind of thing to help myself. It was an interesting experience. It's been helpful. It'll make me spend a bit more time looking at how I can be more positive. Now, all of these things that this participant is saying shows us that, sometimes we don't necessarily know what the outcome of a session might be. And we might think, oh, I don't know, have we kind of started something here without being able to finish it? But the value of the conversation to this participant was, I'm doing all I can, that's okay. I have work to do, but I will spend a bit more time looking at how I can be more positive.
And these are very valuable points, because I'm sure a lot of you, we have anyway experienced that a lot of people are talking about solution focused brief therapy as a very positive approach. It's very positive oriented and solution oriented, but our belief is that it's change oriented. It's a change oriented approach. So it doesn't, it's not a measure of a good session whether or not the client leaves the therapy room happy. It's a measure to see, has the client reached a point where they have identified possible changes or little signs of changes happening already in them? Because quite often, I hear it anyway, people are judging SFBT as a sometimes too positive approach, which that's not the right understanding of solution focused brief therapy. It's about focusing on the change. And this is just as good a session with a client coming out expressing this as a client coming out expressing that they've solved, whatever the climate change is or in the world. You know what I mean? It's such valuable information and understanding for us as therapists as well, that quotes like this that Rachel just shared with us, they're good. This is a person that has had a eureka moment, even though it's not in the standard kind of happy clappy. That's that's an amazing way. But this person might even have been the one making the most change of all the clients that went through the research. To be honest.
Yeah. And you touched on the experience, what role does the therapist take in all of this, Mia?
And what was, I'm sure we expect a lot of you will have heard this before, but we're just getting confirmation that this is happening, even though the setting is so very different. There's a lot of things around them that are not the standard therapy room, but they're saying the same as we've heard before. So like, he kept asking me questions to get me to think in different directions and come up with an answer that made sense to the client. Kind of went back in time to where I was confident, what people helped me to be, what kind of people helped me to be more confident in those situations, and then kind of brought it back to the present, which is a beautiful expression of what we're all talking about, that we are hoping to be doing in our sessions. And here's a client putting words to that. Was feeling I was being listened to. She understood where I was coming from. I remember specifically about this client. The client followed up by saying, we had the same language. So the therapist had been using the client's language. The therapist has no idea where this person was coming from in many ways, but because the same words were being used back in the questions to the client, the person had an understanding that she understood where that person was coming from. And the therapist being able to keep it all and to be able to say it back so that I could hear it in a different way, like a different perspective. So this is the client having their own words being given back to them, and that enables them to think about the situation they've just talked about, and they've just expressed with the same words that are coming back, but suddenly they see it in a different way because they hear it from a person with a different voice, or from a sounding board, or whatever you call it. Like I had a conversation, I did not think that they would, I did not think that that's where the conversation was going to lead. We're talking about that a bit earlier on. He asked about people in my life. And also she paused and gave it some thought. And this specific client, that was such an important thing for that client, because that made the client feel listened to, taken serious, respected, by just pausing and listening, and felt that. I remember him saying that the therapist made me feel that what I brought to the table was worth spending time on, something along those lines, which is very empowering for us all if that when that happens to us. Asking me what I think someone else would say was helpful. So again, putting other people's perspective to it and have a think about that. And I don't necessarily think that you need to think that the person, i.e. the therapist, is going to solve your problem. And that's worth for us all to take back with us. And that's what we've always been talking about within our community, that, you know, we're not there to solve the problems. We know that the clients themselves has the power and the ability to do that. And here's one that's never been in SFBT therapy before, expressing that. It's beautiful. You know, thank you very much for that. It's very confirming.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more, and this is a bit of a long quote, but I think I think it's a good way for us to kind of end. There was one client who was really kind of reflective about the process as a whole and the impact of being in this process, but then also what role the therapist took. And I'll just read directly what they said. They said going through the process, the talking through the process and having someone, and specifically the therapist, asking relevant questions is really useful to me. It has a lot to do with the delivery, the place where I'm physically at. It's really comfortable, but the questions specifically, they highlight things, but they highlight a space when it's that. It makes me think of a different perspective. To have them highlighted for me specifically means that it is being listened to, it's being heard, it's being spoken of, and it's being done in a non-judgmental, sort of open way. And then they go on, and I really love this part. He says the way that she used my own language as well, I feel as if I was met on a level. For me to have someone that I had respect for and that respects me, which I mean by openness, that really allowed me to be free. I just love the sentiment of like, there's just like using the words, listening in this way, asking these really pointed questions, being non-judgmental. That's what created so much change for this individual. And this is actually the individual that said, like, I don't think I need any more sessions than this. This one was sufficient for me. And so I just think that it just kind of wraps up so beautifully kind of what the overall sentiment was for people.
So we're aware of time. 4 minutes left. Um,
And I can see that you've been working through the chat as well, both of you, while
Yes.
we've been going through this. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and comments and enthusiasm. The two of you have looked more closely at the chat than I have. Is there anything in particular that you kind of thought would be useful to bring to the whole group, perhaps? There's a few in there. Yes, there were two therapists, one male, one female, one in the UK, one in the US, but using the solution focused method. No, it's not published yet.
Somebody's asking,
wanted to
what does neurodiverse mean?
Yeah, I was just about
Um,
that one. Yeah.
do you want to, you go ahead, Mia, you can answer.
Yeah, just because it's Kerry McDowell asked about, said, you know, given that some of us who are not neurodivergent need time to process experience, is there an opportunity to ask the questions again later?
Oh gosh, came up, didn't
It's
it?
time
We
to
were talking
facilitate,
about this.
you know, the time
Yeah.
needed for them, for the clients to think about it. And, you know, those two neurodivergent clients that we had in this
Mm.
are the ones that have surprised us the most, because they did not need time to they gave us more feedback than any of the other clients that we had post-session interviews with them. They were able to give much more feedback based on the changes that they were experiencing already. The descriptions, and what surprised us a lot was the client with on the autism spectrum. His descriptions were all emotional.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you know, the common thought would be expecting a more non-emotional expression or way of describing things, but he was a whirlwind of feelings and able to describe differences, how he was feeling that now. So, and this is a little teaser, because we will be bringing some of that forward to all of you later on in the year. But they were actually the ones surprising us the most, because they had much more information to share with us. And that was straight after the sessions. And that was done by a person they'd never met in their life before. And it was done online as well. So all this whole setting around the post interviews with them could, you know, according to what we would expect, have brought up very, very different responses, but they didn't, you know. It's beautiful.
Mm. It was, yeah, it's been such a valuable experience to conduct this research, and we're going to be pulling out so much from it for quite a while yet, and to then start looking at what's happening in the brains while people are going through this, and the types of responses to different questions, and whether neurodiversity does or doesn't make a difference, and we think it really does. It's just an exciting way to begin this kind of work.
Yep.
So I really hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It has been recorded. It will be uploaded to the SF24 YouTube channel. We'll send on the link when it's ready to everyone. And do, of course, please keep in touch with us with any thoughts or comments you have afterwards. And for
Or
now,
even needs that you might have in your own work around, you know, feedback from clients or whatever. Share your ideas with us.
yeah, we'd love to hear them. And with that, I'll stop the recording and wish you a very good next session. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank
Nice
you.
to see you all.